Hello and welcome back to the New York Film Academy Hour. I'm your host, Joelle Smith, and today we're talking all things Oscars on a scale of like Whoopi Goldberg to James Franco. How well did our host do? We're going to talk about it. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies.
Hey guys, obviously we're back in the studio. We have Peter Rainer. Introduction unnecessary at this point, but if you haven't read his book, I just want to encourage you to pick it up. Again, Rainer on Film. It is amazing. Some of the best stuff you're going to read right in there about movies. I don't want to waste any time because there is a lot to talk about in this Oscars. And we talked a little bit before the show. Oscars has been having a lot of up and down. They're trying to find their audience, right? And last year we saw them, okay, we'll open the gates to diversity and we'll bring in a whole new class of Oscar people that is different than any other class we've seen before. But that did not change who was running things or who was hosting the show. What were your general thoughts on the Oscars?
Yeah, well, also the ratings. I mean, it's not really the fault of the Oscars that the ratings are down necessarily, because it's true of all major awards events and things that go on in television now. But the attempt to get more younger people to watch the show was part and parcel of the expansion of the Best Picture category from 5 to 10 a number of years ago, because they thought if you have 10 instead of 5, 10 maximum, that you can have films like Dark Knight and Wonder Woman and
I guess the thought being that if your heart was really into like one of these superhero genre films or something that's not typically for the Oscars, you'd be more likely to watch.
Yeah, I think it comes down to an audience thing. If people don't watch the Oscar shows if the movies are not big hit movies to begin with. It's just that, the year that Titanic was up, it got huge ratings. If there was an equivalent, or if, the Avatar part whatever comes up, or Black Panther, in the next year or so, if those are nominated, then probably the ratings will go back up again. This has nothing to do with the art of film or the quality of film or anything to do with that, which is often the case with the Oscars in general, I have to add. I mean, the Oscars are a whole lot of fun, or can be, to watch and participate in. But I've never taken them to be, an absolute indication of excellence. The number of best movies of the year that actually were the best movies of the year are few and far between.
Few and far in between.
The Godfather was the best film of the year, of almost any year, and there are a few other examples like that. But, a colleague of mine, Danny Perry, once did a book about the alternative Oscars from the first year of films that should have been, should have won or even been nominated and were not. Vertigo was not nominated. Gordon Willis, who shot The Godfather 1 and 2 and many other films, both of the Godfather films were not even nominated for Best Cinematography.
That is insane.
I mean, it's totally insane. Forget
that final shot in Godfather. I feel like today would have solidified it alone. Like,
yeah, so that's why everybody was happy that Roger Deakins won Best Cinematographer for Blade Runner, because he's a great cinematographer.
He is an excellent cinematographer.
And this was, I think, his 14th nomination this year without ever having won. So that was nice. But what the Academy tends to do is they give honorary Oscars to people who they oops. So, Willis at one point...
feel kind of false to you? It always rings as a false note to me, because when you then look back at Roger Deakins' incredible career, you're like, well, for Blade Runner was the best thing he's ever shot?
A lot of people, Cary Grant never got, Kobe Bryant got an Oscar, but Cary Grant never did, or
it's
Alfred Hitchcock
mesmerizing.
For a film that he directed and so forth. It's kind of crazy. So that's why I say you have to take all this stuff with a grain of salt. Or a ton of salt. But, having said that, I think, I don't think it was the world's greatest movie year, period. And so, therefore, that translates to some extent to the show.
Sure.
I do think my favorite films of the 9 that were nominated, and couldn't they have made it 10? What's the problem? The Big Sick could have been one of the 10.
Absolutely.
Florida Project, probably my favorite movie of the year.
A lot of people really enjoyed that movie.
I mean, they only got one nomination, Willem Dafoe, for supporting actor. And in my opinion, he should have won that. Sam Rockwell, Three Billboards for me is a problematic movie.
We've talked about this,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, and I think that the Sam Rockwell, he's very funny and affable and jaunty in
Sam
that
Rockwell's
role.
an incredible actor, but for this role, really?
Yeah, I mean, he's playing a vile racist who throws people through windows, etc., and somehow he's supposed to be redeemed, but I don't think they dealt with who that character is at all, and so I just found that really problematic. I liked Phantom Thread a lot. I think that was one of the 9.
Gorgeous film.
I mentioned Big Sick and Get Out, which is, one of my very favorite films of the year. Just a terrific movie. I'm glad that won screenplay.
No, we had talked about this. This was a huge one for us. It's one of the few that we agreed upon should definitely, without question, win the award. I was not shocked to see it, but man, the reactions, not just from the crowd, but like to see his writing partner, Keegan-Michael Key, like in the back, jumping up and down, freaking out, for his friend. And then, of course, he's the first black guy to win this, first black person to win this award. Let's check out Jordan Peele's speech real quick, because it is moving and lovely.
You guys are gonna mess up my jet ski. Hold up. This means so much to me. I stopped writing this movie about 20 times because I thought it was impossible. I thought it wasn't gonna work. I thought no one would ever make this movie. But I kept coming back to it because I knew if someone let me make this movie, that people would hear it and people would see it. So I want to dedicate this to all the people who raised my voice and let me make this movie. Donna, Ron at Universal, everybody, QC, Sean, Ted, Bea, Jason at Blumhouse. You guys, thank you so much. To the cast and crew, I love you. Thank you so much. My wife, who supported me through this whole process. My mother, who taught me to love even in the face of hate. And to everybody who went and saw this movie. Everybody who bought a ticket. Who told somebody to buy a ticket.
I saw it 3 times because it was that good.
I love you for shouting out at the theater.
I'm really looking forward to seeing it in black and white. I hear that's going to be pretty cool.
Oh, it's black and white?
I think they're going to do a black and white. Y'all don't quote me on this, but I think they're going to do a black and white version on the DVD.
Why?
It's a thing people are doing now. We did it for Logan, had an entire black and white release, and then what was the other one?
Mad Max Fury Road got a black and chrome edition.
Wait, which one?
Mad Max Fury Road.
Yes, that one.
Black and chrome.
It sure did. Black and chrome. That's great marketing right there. I really appreciate the stretch on that. But it's just like a thing we're doing now, I guess. And it makes my inner art house kid be like, excited. I know that, it's not filmed for black and white, but who cares? It's going to be fun anyway. It's just a new way.
The cinematographer may have a different idea about all that.
They usually do.
Color correction lighting and it's all thrown overboard. Huh.
But this speech rings out for a couple of reasons, not just because of its historic importance, but I think it's historic in a way that we're not quite talking about yet, which is the Blumhouse. Which has basically makes very low budget slasher films up until this point when they made the turn into political thrillers. Do you think that this changes or alters in any way the landscape for production houses like this?
You mean
like at least on the road to the Oscars, like in being able to make. Because, this also loops back into the fact that we're not seeing a lot of middle budget films anymore. You're either like very bottom of the barrel, $2-3 million, which sounds like a lot, kids, but it's really not on a film set, to these, 200, nearly $1 billion features. I just feel like maybe they could turn a tide. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. It's nothing speaks like success in the movie business, and if you make a movie on a relatively low budget, which is certainly true of Get Out, and it does extremely well, not to mention being a really good movie and winning Oscars, that ought to be an indication. I've never understood why it is that more of the money people in the movie business don't finance more low-budget movies, because most movies don't make their money back. And if you make a movie that's $150 million budget, which is, I think, sort of average now for a studio picture, or 200 or plus, it has to make like, $500 million to break even. Whereas if you make a movie for 15 or 20 million, it only has to make about 50 million. And so and you can make 4 movies for the price of 1, and you quadruple your odds of having a hit. When Easy Rider and those movies were out in in the late 60s and 70s, that was part of the thinking, that a lot of the studios had these big clinkers like Dr. Dolittle and whatnot, and they said, well, let's give the keys to the kingdom to all these hippies and see if they can make low budget movies that'll make $300 million. And that worked for a while, and then it didn't. But I still think it's a good idea for financial success. It's also a much better idea for making better movies, because the bigger your budgets, the more likely you are to take fewer chances. It's just the way it is. You're not going to take a lot of chances if you're making a $200 million movie.
Not only that, but like, let's look at the fact that we've by a lot overworking our post-production houses. These things are opening and closing at rapid fire rates. And we're getting films unfinished in theater. It's just like a Wild West kind of era in Hollywood right now. Like Black Panther had something like 100 unfinished shots. We saw what happened with Justice League and the incomplete mustache fiasco. It's intriguing to me that we keep pushing that way, and I do hope we find middle ground, because not only are you more likely to get, just by odds, you're going to have more successful films, but I think people are also more passionate about their small projects. Like, you can give someone who's like, this is my baby and I love it, and maybe no one else will get it, but like, I will work really hard for you to get this film out there.
Yeah, I think, I wasn't as nuts about Lady Bird as most people are, but I enjoyed it a lot. That's another example of a sort of, handcrafted movie by someone who wrote and directed it, for a relatively low budget, because she really cared about this story. And, there were no space invaders in it. There were no big special effects and so forth. And I believe that did well commercially also. It really comes down to, do you want to make movies that you care about, or do you just want to keep making these movies that you think are going to, be a bonanza? But because that often doesn't work anyway. If you set out to make a hit movie, a lot of times, unless it's a sequel to a hit movie and all the elements are in place.
And even then, we saw Transformers do that horrible downward spiral of like selling out films to theaters and arenas, to like even stage like arena shows, to no one wanted to see the last one, even though they were like, okay, well, we'll go. You have to see the movie.
Well, I begged off of that one. I said I can't see another Transformers movie.
I'm drawing a line in the sand.
Just can't.
Yeah, the third one did it for me too. When you have racist robots, I just can't. I can't push past that. And yet there's something, and I feel like maybe by getting more of these middle ground films, we'll get more like. These films used to be so epic and amazing. Like, I remember going to the theater when I was like a wee thing, and to see something in IMAX was just astounding. It had to be so big and technically impressive. And now I feel like we're kind of unfazed by that. We had a little spike of it, some people felt, during Avatar, which special effects wise, you couldn't deny the film. Story you might have some feelings about. So. And I think it's interesting that we're talking about this here and that it's reflected in the Oscars, because for its 90th, I expected the Oscars to go like all out. Like, their set design was incredible and very impressive with the paneling, but other than that, like, no giant performances. All the performances were very simple, clean, in and out quickly. No big sketches that kind of, stop the show with all of the stars. The same bit from last year with the, like, let's go meet regular folks. Do you think the Oscars is taking a cue from the industry? And is there anything you think they can do to regain their audience? Or is the Oscars, kind of a fading, I don't want to say memory, but something of the old that we're just kind of clinging to? Well,
it still has extremely high ratings relative to what's out there. It's just that it was like a 20% dip or something this year. But, like I said, that's not that unusual for award shows now, almost all of which have decreased in audience because of the internet and Netflix, people just sort of watching bits and pieces on YouTube and not actually sitting through the whole show. And so that's a problem. If you had, I mean, hypothetically, let's say Black Panther is way up there next year in major categories. I guarantee you the viewership is going to go way up. That's how it works. And the year that No Country for Old Men won Best Picture, viewership was way down. Because, it just wasn't a grabby movie. This year, you had a couple of old school movies that normally would have been big Oscar pictures like Dunkirk and Darkest Hour, but especially Dunkirk is, you know, this big panoramic widescreen war movie, historical epic, and that's the kind of film that would traditionally win the Oscar and also bring in viewers. But that didn't really happen, I don't think.
No, on either front. And yet, interestingly, still walked away with the most awards for the night, but not the big ones.
Right, the technical stuff, yeah. I'm just going to make a very brief angry cavil here of the personal nature. You know when they have those in memoriam things?
Yes, absolutely.
And everybody gets like 3 or 4 seconds max put in there? So my good friend and colleague, the late Richard Schickel, was put up for this. I know because I was part of a campaign to do this with some very high-level people involved. And guess what? He went on the show. Now, I don't know why that is. This guy wrote 37 books on the history of film. Many of them are classics. He did 37 movies that he produced, written, directed about the history of film, documentaries. He was a member of the Producers Guild, the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild. He actually produced and directed and wrote several segments for the Oscar show in tributes to directors like Elia Kazan and Satyajit Ray. Andrew Sarris, Manny Farber, and Charles Champlin were all recognized in the past, so there's a precedent for this sort of thing. You know, unfathomable. Okay. Now I'm done.
I mean, we've seen this a lot in the past, especially when crew members die on set, which is always a horrible tragedy. And last year, or was it 2 years ago now? I'm getting old. A couple of years ago, they were like, okay, well, our answer to this will be we'll just put them up right before commercials, because they would have a host in the aisle talking, you know, like, stay tuned, this is coming up next. And while they're doing their spiel, it was essentially their name in a small photo, which, you know, if we have to sit there for 10 minutes to honor our dead, I don't, especially because the whole idea, I think, of the Oscars is the community coming together to celebrate the cream of its crop. I don't think anyone would mind staying a little bit extra, but I get there's programming and a lot of things that go into it, and it must be a terrible decision to have to make who makes it and who doesn't. But I also think that, you know,
well, they made the absolute wrong decision on this one. And the other thing is the Oscars don't have, there's not enough sense of history. It used to be that they had these special governor awards, you know, and they were on stage, these people, and you know, so now they have a special dinner, which is fine. It, you know, gives a lot of time, and they film it, and it's a wonderful event. But then they show like 3 seconds of it on the actual telecast. So, you know, Gordon Willis, I mentioned, got one, you know, a number of years ago, and Roger Corman and Jean-Luc Godard and Agnes Varda and so forth. Why isn't that at least featured a little more in, you know, in terms of some of the clips from the actual dinner, if not having them on the stage? You know, this industry has a memory about 3 seconds long about, you know, why are these people there? It's because of their forebears.
I agree wholeheartedly. And it's interesting that we're talking about looking back. A lot of people are looking ahead at what comes next as we enter more of a digital age, as we look at television being able to rival storytelling capabilities of film, and as we look at the changing political landscape, just the idea that the editor-in-chief of the tracking board, I'm so sorry, his name always escapes me, and I just want to mention Jeff Sneider. Yeah, Jeff Sneider. Who I've met Jeff, and I really like Jeff. I think he's a cool dude. He sent out this tweet earlier, basically saying, "I don't walk out of movies thinking about thinking about isms or identity politics, but this is what younger critics seem to be engaging in these days. The conversation surrounding movies has shifted beneath our feet. Do we shift with it or stand our ground?" Which, the shift with it or stand our ground, to me essentially sounds like I don't understand why people are intrigued more by the visual aspects, i.e. being race, gender representation, who made the film, as opposed to just the story that's on the screen. And you know, in reading the comments, I can see a lot on both sides, truly and honestly. Like, I get some of film purists, which I really don't like the term, but, you know, I get people who are like, all I want is a good story. It doesn't matter anything beyond that to me. But to me, you know, as a person who loved film and didn't see themselves, it's impossible for me to separate the message / who's making it to the end story. To that effect, Wrinkle in Time, which I can recognize as not being the greatest movie of all time, but still held a really important significance to me. And I was wondering, as somebody who's been in criticism for a long time and made their stamp on it, do you walk out of a film going, you know, it's just the story, nothing else?
No. No, I mean, that's just who I am, but I don't think with any, you know, good critic that's really ever been the case. If you just talk about a movie in terms of, you know, story, plot, the cinematography was good, check, the acting was good, check. You know, the great thing about writing about movies is that you can talk about them on so many different levels. And particularly in fallow periods where the movies aren't all that great, there's still a lot to talk about in terms of the sociological aspect of film, how films reflect society, and all of that, which I think is really fascinating. It's not what drew me to movies. I didn't go to movies when I was a little kid because I wanted to see, you know, the right gender representation. I went to because, you know, it was a wonderful story and I loved the actors and it was exciting. And that's still the impulse, I think, that draws all of us to movies. But there's more to movies than that. Not all movies, but I think, you know, I don't think it's an either-or situation. You know, isms versus just going there to enjoy the movie, quote unquote. I think that you can do both. And Get Out is a perfect example because that's a movie. I saw that twice with an audience, and the audience was with it like, you know, like you often hear in like really good horror movie or something.
Yeah.
You know, screaming on cue and laughing on cue and really eating it up. And you can enjoy the movie perfectly on that level, you know, without getting into some of the other things that it's also about. But one of the things that critics try to do is bring in those other things, you know, so that if it wasn't recognized when you saw the movie, that it adds a dimension to it. In the same way that, you know, The Godfather, I'm sure, was experienced by most audiences as just a really good gangster movie with all these, you know, gangster things going on in it, as opposed to the larger scope of what that film is about, that this was sort of like this you know, nightmare version of the American dream, you know, that these immigrants came and this is what happened to them, and it's sort of an alternate universe world of you know, of capitalism, of the American dream gone bad. And I mean, all of those things can be discussed. It's not the immediate response to that movie that you have, and for some people, that's the immediate response is all that you have, and that's okay. But I think you're missing something as a serious critic if you don't bring in all of those elements. You know, not because you have to, but because, you know, you should want to, because movies are about so many different things. It's exciting.
I couldn't agree with you more. My favorite film critic was Roger Ebert. I'm from Chicago, and so that was all I knew was Ebert and Roper coming up. Right. And what I always valued from his reviews was how much emotion he put into it. And he would straight up say, like, maybe it's just not for me, but like, these are very staunchly my opinions. And to your point about, you know, film criticism, I think, especially, I'm sure you've seen a lot about the Rotten Tomatoes scandal lately, where there's a huge debate as to whether
fix the numbers.
Yeah, or somehow critics are against the studio system. Like, we want it to we want films to fail, and we just hate movies for some reason, which makes very little sense. And why would you get in this business? The studios
probably promoted that idea.
They sure, no, they do. They're like, we don't even care about the Rotten Tomatoes score. And it's like, well, okay, that's fine. It's really not there for you. It's just potentially a guide of like, what do these critics think about? And I find it so valuable to be reading critics. Someone pointed out to me the other day that Thor Ragnarok is essentially a tale of Aboriginal freedom. And trying to, and what is that like to try to get your freedom after your culture's been stolen from you? To the point where there's an Aboriginal flag when Tessa Thompson's crossing the Rainbow Bridge. I had I never could have picked up that story. So it's just I'm really glad we got to talk about all of this, because I feel like there's so much changing and happening in Hollywood, and trying to keep up, especially in the age of social media. It's such a challenge.
Yeah, well, you know, the Rotten Tomatoes syndrome is that, you know, the studios always attack critics for saying, well, you you don't like big Hollywood movies. You only like these small scale, foreign films, independent movies, films with subtitles. You don't like movies that make a lot of money, et cetera, et cetera. It's not really true. Particularly these days when, you're just desperate to see anything good.
Yes.
And there are plenty of studio pictures that I've, enjoyed over the years, even recently. But I don't review a movie based on its budget. And I almost never mention the budget, even when it's way out of sight in a review, because, what are you going to keep mentioning the budget? But pretty soon you're going to be, doing the roundup for the box office scores every week. You don't want to go there. Movies are what they are. They cost what they cost. Yes, the budget of this movie could have paid for a hospital in Zimbabwe, but it doesn't work that way. I think, just speaking for myself, and I think for a lot of my colleagues, critics, critics are people too. Critics are Soylent Green is people. That says. And so we like the same things that everybody else likes, except we've seen more movies and maybe have more to say about the movies we've seen. But, in the end, you want to be entertained and then some. And whoever provides that, more power to them.
Totally. I feel like critics cannot exist without the art, and I don't think anybody who critiques or wants to look at art for a living hates themselves enough to do it because they don't like art. Like it's just a complete fallacy to be like, oh, you got into this just so you could shame movies. Or the other argument I hear a lot is like, well, you couldn't make movies, so now you're out here just critiquing other people. And it's like, look, man, even if we didn't like your film, that's no judgment against you as a human being, or your work or your capability to make a film. It's just maybe this one did not sit for us.
I often find, people will say to me, gee, you don't like anything. And I say, well, so like what, for example? And they say, well, you don't like this and this and this. I said, well, have you seen those films? Well, no, but you just don't like all these films. I said, why don't you go back and see them, and then we'll talk. And sometimes it happens. They come back and say, you were too kind. You were too kind. If anything, critics are more likely to like something in a movie that the average moviegoer would not like, because if you see 250 to 300 movies a year, which is what I do and many of my colleagues, you want anything in that movie to be good, you'll overvalue it if there's a single performance or something.
I've certainly done it before, where people are like, really?
I mean, you used to go on about, gee, it was such a terrific performance. Yeah, but what about the movie sucked? Yeah, but that performance was really good.
It kept me going through the whole movie, man. I was tired.
Yeah, but people don't, and they say, well, you don't have to pay. And this is actually an interesting point. It says, well, for the most part, you don't have to pay to see movies as a critic. Therefore, you don't have to make the kinds of choices that we hardworking people who have to spend our money to, what are we going to pay our money to see? I understand that argument, but that still doesn't take away from the fact that if I say this is a film that I think is worth seeing, translation, I would think this is money well spent. I'm saving people a lot of money by saying don't go to these terrible movies if they bother to. But I always say to people, if you really want to see a movie and then say you read me and I don't like it, tough. Don't see the movie anyway. Don't throw it overboard just because of what I said or some other critic. You need to trust your own judgments, your own feelings. You may end up hating it too. You may love it and say this guy's full of it. But the first and foremost, you should trust your own judgment. I always want people to read my reviews after they've seen the movie. That's not very realistic, but and with Rotten Tomatoes, a lot of the movie companies, particularly the boutique companies, the indie classics divisions, they have, not so much recently, but I've gotten calls saying, that review that you wrote, they have it down as a splatter, but it's a fresh, how do you read it? Because we want to appeal it to Rotten Tomatoes, appeal the designation.
Yeah, sure. Of course.
And it's a big deal. Or they'll say, like, you haven't gotten around to reviewing this film. How about reviewing it? Translation. How about liking it so it'll get a better Rotten Tomatoes score? So, I mean, it does factor into the discussion in that sense.
It's definitely something they're thinking about. I've definitely had PR agents, especially now that you have to send your reviews in like immediately after seeing the movie. They're like, you just give us like a paragraph example of how you're feeling. I've been like, so we are sending this to the studio. Like, I told you the truth the first time. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I know. I'm not crazy about giving reactions. There are a few old-time publicists that I'm friends with who I say, all right, usually I just say mixed, and that gets off my back. But it's also, it's not entirely a line when I say I don't really know what I think about the film until I've written about it. I mean, I certainly know if I come out of a movie and it's like, wow, or ugh. But sometimes in the course of writing about a film, you discover things in it that maybe meant more to you than you realized at the time, or less, or, you know, what you like sort of burns off after the first day, or it stays with you. You know, it's not these publicists who ambush you as you walk out of the screening. So what do you think? You know, on many levels, it doesn't really compute with how critics operate.
Yeah, definitely. I'm the annoying one who's always like, is there a second screening of this? I need to see a movie like 2 or 3 times to have like the most genuine feelings about it, unless it leaps off of the screen for me, in which case I can go home and like jot it all down. I do want to circle us back to the Oscars. This conversation is very fascinating to me. I want to talk, we talked a little bit about politics. This is the year of women, a lot of people are calling it, and the Time's Up campaign. And Frances McDormand was going to have a big jelly. She was one of the ones people knew she was going to win. There wasn't a lot of debate about it. I was secretly hoping for a Sally Hawkins upset.
Me too.
Not because I like one more than the other, but just Sally's performance was out of sight.
Right. Not to mention her performance in Maudie this year, which nobody saw.
You told us about this movie. I still need to see Maudie.
Yeah.
But Frances did win, and at the end of her speech, she says something interesting. Let's take a quick look.
Thank you to the
this is
Academy.
Coco. We were
So
looking for
happy.
Frances McDormand.
Coco is proof.
This is also an interesting speech,
Frances
though.
McDormand's clip was stolen along with her Oscar.
Her Oscar was stolen, which I can't even believe.
But, yeah.
So fast. So fast these things
A little
happen.
bit if I fall over, pick me up because I've got some things to
Love
say.
her energy.
I know you are proud of me, and that fills me with everlasting joy. And now I want to get some perspective. If I may be so honored to have all the female nominees in every category stand with me in this room tonight. The actors, Meryl, if you do it, everybody else will, come on. The filmmakers, the producers, the directors, the writers, the cinematographer, the composers, the songwriters, the designers. Come on. Ms. Boyne.
It's precious, never change.
Okay, look around, everybody. Look around, ladies and gentlemen, because we all have stories to tell and projects we need financed.
So interesting that ABC cut it off there, because at the end of it, she says something. That was a really beautiful, moving moment. But at the end, she has this very profound statement where she says, I just want to say 2 words, which is inclusion writer, diversity writer. Which
It was inclusion writer, but
was it inclusion writer?
Yeah.
Okay. Either way, the goal of that message is where you go, you need to be bringing in the change that you seek. If you are a star, which most people in that room were, you get to ask for things when you show up. Now, some people are like, I want all white furniture and my M&M separated by color. Some people, like Robin Williams, was like, when you hire me, you have to, what is it, 10% of the crew you hire has to be homeless, and I will eat whatever they eat.
oh, I didn't.
Yeah, which is an incredible gesture to say, where I go, I'm going to just be spreading some of my wealth and some of the help. Which, to me, it's so interesting now. Like, we had James Franco was, talked about being nominated endlessly until the reports came out. I don't think there's been any conclusion to those reports as of yet. But it definitely took his name off of the ballot. Casey didn't come back this year to present because of the accusations against him reported in, I believe, Vanity Fair and Hollywood Reporter. I wonder how this will change, like, who gets hired initially. And we've seen a lot of people lose shows and things, but I have a feeling if history repeats itself that, like, in 2 or 3 years, you know, Frank Underwood, I cannot remember his actual name, Kevin Spacey will be back. You know what I mean? Like, you can't. And then we saw, you know, the guy who won for Best Actor, I'm so bad with names right now. I don't know why this is happening to me. Gary Oldman has been accused of some things in his past, but was able to win this year. With the politics kind of being shaky and new, and with a lot of this movement happening from the faces in front of the camera and not necessarily the powers that be in hiring, do you think all of this conversation long-term has an effect, or is Hollywood going to be what Hollywood has always been, which is mostly a business and about who brings who into theaters?
Yeah, my sense of it is that this is different this time. That in the past, you know, you have all these sort of big movements and then nothing happens. But I do think that it's going to require people in positions of power to actively say, you need to pay these people better. You know, you need to pay your female co-stars on a level with male co-stars. The reason why these actors get as much money as they do is because someone has figured out that globally they're worth it. They bring in enough money so that they're worth these salaries. But why is it that I mean, Gal Gadot is I would guess going to get an absolute fortune for any Wonder Woman movie that comes out. Not for any other movie that she might appear in, but for Wonder Woman. You know, that's just a matter of supply and demand. But I do think that if Susan Sarandon came out with an anecdote today or yesterday where she said, in regards to the you know, the inclusion writer, that when she did a film with Paul Newman called Twilight, that he found out that she was making a great deal less than he was, and she was essentially like, you know, had the same screen time, the same everything as him. So he said, well, I'll give you some of my salary to make up the difference. And, you know, and if more people thought like that, the whole hoo-ha with Mark Wahlberg getting $1.5 million to do reshoots on all that money can buy, whereas Michelle Williams got, like, scale for the reshoots, had to do with Mark Wahlberg's agent and the fact that in his contract it said if you do reshoots, you got to negotiate what you're going to get paid, whereas apparently she, who had the same agent, didn't have that. Well, she should have had that contract. He ultimately gave his money to Me Too, I think, you know. Yeah. But you need people in positions of power. Actors, you know, agents have to be very much on the stick about this. That if you set up a contract with a co-star, they have to get paid, and if they don't like it, lump it. But the problem is a lot of people are so desperate for work that they'll accept, you know, something that's far less than what they should be getting just to get the work. If you're a first-time actor and you somehow hit it big and you're co-starring in a movie, I've known instances like this where you know, they got $40,000, whereas the co-star got $2 million. It's because you know, you would pay me $40,000 to be the star of a Hollywood movie, so we're paying you $40,000, you know, and be lucky that you're getting it. There's no one way to do it, but I do think that you know, in terms of the harassment situation, you could do away with a lot of it by just saying no more meetings except in offices. With the door open, with someone present.
But can Hollywood really work that way? I mean, we do so much business out of hotels. I mean, I spend a great deal of time in hotels with people I've never met before. Right. Not for anything. We're just literally, that's where all of the work happens, especially once we get to, like, festival season. So I definitely think some things need to change. I think we're starting to see a lot of good improvement. One thing I've been hearing a lot that I'm kind of excited about is a lot of people are encouraging men to just share with your female colleagues how much you're making. Just drop that number on them and let them take things into their own hands and start making decisions and being like, hey, you know, I know for a fact that you're paying other people does X amount more than me. We do about the same amount of work. Let's try to get closer to that number.
It's tough. I remember many years ago I worked for a newspaper, and there was some union dissension, and the higher ups were screwing around. So somebody posted on the board what everybody was making. They got all, and it was like, really, this person's making that?
Wow.
I mean, it was not great. But I think in the end, I think there will be some small incremental change at the very least. I don't think it's going to be some sea change where suddenly all actresses who are co-starring with male stars are getting the same, etc. It's too competitive a business. There are too many people who want the same job that you have, and therefore you're willing to take a lot less and do a lot less and put up with harassment and whatnot to get to where you are. It's just a fact of life, but I do think it can be improved, and there have to be better recourse when these bad things happen. With not only law enforcement but with the guilds, that there has to be a clear line of reporting of these offenses, so that something can be done about it in the moment, not 15 years later. It's a wild, wide open business. It's not like almost any other business, the movie business. But of course, all of these issues go on in everything aside from movies too, which is where the real problems are overall. That people just aren't getting paid what they should get paid because of gender and whatever. It shouldn't be that way.
I think that's absolutely the reason why people are attracted to this business in the first place. Is there's an excitement about it. The fact that you're not working like a regular job, the fact that you are constantly on the move, and meeting new people, and all that stuff creates it's like a warm buzz and excitement. Plus, then there's like the actual art of crafting something and getting to showcase it. And at least that's what I was giving myself away. It's what drew me to the film industry.
Yeah, well, it's the thing is, it wasn't always this way, really, because in the golden age of Hollywood, the actresses got paid the same as the male stars. Katharine Hepburn, Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, Olivia de Havilland, all of those stars got paid as much as Humphrey Bogart and John Wayne and Montgomery Clift,
I did not know that.
Yeah. So, and the other problem is that people, and maybe this is a good thing that came out of this year. There's always been this assumption that black themed movies only sell in America. That domestically, or that
hilarious.
or that female driven movies cannot be big box office, etc. Tell that to, Girls Trip, to Hidden Figures, to Wonder Woman. Regardless of what you think of these movies as movies, it disproves the notion that they can't make a lot of money. And so, to me, that's the most, or Lady Bird for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very promising. Or certainly Get Out.
Black Panther is about to hit $1 billion before reaching China, which is still inconceivable to me.
Right, and I think it probably, there's always this thing, which apparently is sort of a myth, that black themed movies don't do well in Asia. Okay, I bet that's not true. Certainly of Black Panther.
Chadwick Boseman is one of their highest grossing. I believe this is for South Korea. It's one of the highest grossing film actors over there. That's insane. And I actually just saw a group of people went over to interview, do street style interviews of South Koreans who had seen Black Panther, and just to get their opinion. And opinions ranged, but almost everyone they talked to had seen the movie.
Yeah.
So it's just beyond. It's ridiculous to think that people don't want to sit down for a good story. If you're not funding those films and they're not getting out and getting a chance to be seen, there's especially no way you can know that they're not going to sell.
Yeah.
And the myth has been dispelled too many times. So.
Yeah, it's a self in thinking the way they think, which is not correct. If you make these movies and there's commercial potential there, and they're entertaining and they're about people, then people will come. But you have to make more of these movies. Otherwise, it's just the same old stuff, the same old myths and the same old we can't do this because of that. It's not true. And so if you make a couple of million less than you might normally make by doing some of these films. Well, boo-hoo. So now you've made, now you have a $20 million in your bank account instead of $28 million in your bank account. You know, you can't take it with you. You got to be in this business for other reasons too. And one of the things that Oscar is supposed to celebrate is success and quality. One of the beefs I have with Oscars, though, is that they often only go for the so-called good movies that have done well commercially. And I think one reason why Florida Project hardly got noticed in the Oscars is because, I don't know, I assume it did okay, it didn't cost much, but it certainly wasn't a blockbuster or anything. And that's probably one reason why. You know, it has the taint of you know, uncommercial attached to it. And so it's not high up on the list of films that get nominated for awards.
April Reign, who created the Oscar So White hashtag, recently expressed some frustrations with the fact that Academy members are not necessarily watching these movies. There is nothing in the guidelines of to the Academy members that says, you know, you have to watch the movies. So there's no they have screenings so that people can go see the movies, and of course they send out screeners so you can watch it in the comfort of your own home, but they cannot tell who went and saw it. Someone suggested perhaps that, you know, there's 15, 20 screenings throughout the year, and you have to go and get checked off to say, hey, you know, I did actually view this film. They do these secret Oscar conversations kind of every year with Academy members to ask them, basically judge like where their feelings are. One of the members in secret talking about Get Out for it.
Yeah.
Basically saying that he didn't feel the film itself was political,
right,
which is ridiculous. I know the theme song's in Swahili, but it's basically listen to your ancestors, get out.
Right,
it is entirely a political film.
Right.
Do you, as a critic, do you agree that people should have to see the movies? And is that something that's feasible?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're voting, you need to see the movies. I think in documentary and foreign language film, there is some sort of stipulation that you have to see the movies by actually going somewhere and signing in or something. At least that was that case at least a year or so ago. Yeah, no, I mean, the other categories, you can just vote on a whim without having seen anything. And particularly if you're talking about cinematography, it's not the greatest thing to vote on cinematography, for instance, if you're seeing it on a home screen, particularly if it's not, you know, one of these humongous screens. So, you know, I think you definitely need to see the movies. It's part of being in the Academy is supposed to be an honor. It's an honorary thing. It doesn't just come to you because you make movies. You have to be voted in and so forth. It's a big deal, and therefore you should be treating it like a big deal and take your vote seriously, the same way you take your vote seriously if you're voting for, you know, president or senator or something like that. I mean, I think you need to see the movies. I mean, in the old days, people would vote for, you know, if you were working for Warner's, Jack Warner said everybody at Warner's has to vote for a Warner's movie, you know. And I guess there was no way to prove it, but if nothing won from Warner's, you probably felt like, you know, am I still going to be here tomorrow? But I think it's very important to see the movies. It sounds stupid, but if you're going to go for these films, you have to. But somehow, you know, if a studio doesn't get behind a particular movie, if they don't send out enough screeners, they put all their weight on another film that they want to win, that's a problem too, because you can only vote on something that you've seen. And you know, the wonderful Harvey Weinstein a couple of years ago killed a terrific movie called The Immigrant, James Gray's movie, because he had a tiff with the director over the ending and a few other you know, stupid things. And he deliberately set out to destroy that movie. There were very few screeners that were sent out, a buggy link, one Academy screening on either coast, no big promotion in the papers, nothing. Even when Marion Cotillard was the co-winner of Best Actress for that film in the New York Film Critics, none of the Weinstein people showed up at the dinner to honor their own movie, even though their office was 3 blocks away. You know, this sabotaging of films is not infrequent. It was very apparent with the Weinstein Company, but it's been the case in general that studios will sometimes, you know, they say, well, we only have a limited budget, so we want to promote this thing that we think is going to win. You know, or we don't want to ruin the chances of something or other. So Sally Hawken, who was wonderful in this movie Maudie, in a normal year, in the best of worlds, that would have been the performance, even more so than Shape of Water, that would have been in the spotlight. But you don't want to split votes, you don't want to do this, you want to confuse people. So it's complicated. But yes, you have to see the films for sure. But the people who are behind these films have to make more of an effort to promote them and get people to see them, and not play favorites so much. Because you might be surprised. Some stuff might be really good that you didn't know was good, that people are liking and may get a nomination.
This is why we've been telling you guys to go see festivals, from cricket to a lot of the instructors that come in here. You going out and, as you said earlier, Peter, forming your own opinion about these films is vital, not just to your education as a filmmaker or as a film enthusiast even, but kind of as a person who just wants to appreciate art. Like, if you enjoy the movies, then you're a person who appreciates art, even if it's not, what maybe some people would consider highbrow art. It's art, it's a craft, and going out to see these films and engaging in them as yourself, as opposed to all the things that come after, it's vital and important. And we've talked a lot today about some of the problems within the industry and some of our struggles. And I think that comes from a year of, for me, the Oscars for a long time was the highlight of my year. I love the Oscars. It's glitz and glam and film history and cinema, and it's always exciting to kind of see everyone in the same room interacting and oh, we work together or whatever. And for the 90th, and especially an important year with Get Out, which we've talked a lot about how last year was kind of lackluster as far as big audience appreciation for films. But Get Out is a film that's going to stand the test of time, and people are going to come back to it. And I kind of had just higher expectations for the 90th Oscars. That being said, I'm A, going to be back for the 91st, and B, loved a lot of moments from here, most specifically Coco's musical win. I talk a lot about representation and what it means to me, but the more I think about representation for me as a human being, the more I think about it for other people who are not like me. I have a friend who recently confided in me that her parents are here illegally from Mexico, and it took a lot for her to say it to me, and she was nervous about it. And I know about Dreamers. I know a lot about the international struggles who either come here or stay here. But it had never touched so close to home. And so to sit there and then see this Coco win, where we could see Latinx artists for each other, celebrating each other, announcing each other, and then finally accepting the award, it was really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Coco is proof that art can change and connect the world, and this can only be done when we have a place for everyone and anyone who feels like an other to be heard. This is dedicated with enormous love to my gigantic interwoven family, and most especially my wife, my rock, Corey Ray.
Love and thanks to my family, my Latino community, to my husband, Ryan, each for expanding my sense of what it means to be proud of who you are and where you're from. We hope the same thing for everyone who connected with this film.
We share this with our immensely talented cast and crew, as well as the executive teams at Disney and Pixar. Thanks for the support of my wife, Laura, my 3 kids, Hannah, Alice, Max, my entire family. I love you. And the biggest thank you of all to the people of Mexico. Coco would not exist without your endlessly beautiful culture and traditions. With Coco, we tried to take a step forward toward a world where all children can grow up seeing characters in movies that look and talk and live like they do. Marginalized people deserve to feel like they belong. Representation matters.
Oh, that's such a beautiful speech. I am not crying. So I guess I just want to end with that note, because as we've talked about a lot of the issues, I think before we weren't talking about them, and I know a lot of people are upset that it's, oh, it's so much politics. I just want to go back to being able to go to the movies and enjoy it, and I very much understand that desire, because the movies it's a house of escape for us for a few hours. But I also think that now that we're getting to talk about them, now that they're open, that the tide will change, and that we will see a lot of the representation and the kinds of stories that maybe didn't get to be told before. I think it's a brand new day for film. It's going to take a while, and it may not always be pretty getting there, but I'm glad that we're here and that it's happening.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you so much for being with us here
Thanks,
today,
Joelle.
Peter. This is
Sure.
really wonderful. Guys, we'll see you next week. It's International Women's Day today. So hey ladies, making films, very awesome. We're gonna have a lot of ladies for you coming up for the rest of the month. Excited to talk about their process, what filmmaking means to them, and the impact it's had on their lives. So stay tuned here at the New York Film Academy Hour. I'll see you guys next week.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Popcorn Talk Network or its owners or principals.